Well, hello, free people of the Rocky Mountain region, and welcome to this Free State Colorado interview. Today, I'm joined by James Wiley, Republican candidate for Colorado Secretary of State. James has been a guest previously, providing updates on the Secretary of State Jenna Griswold scandals and the lawsuit against her last year that James wrote and led. Well, James, I hope you are well, and thank you for joining me today.
It's great to be back. Thanks for having me, Brandon.
Well, James, I want to talk about your campaign, and I know a lot of people are interested in what's happening with Tina Peters. That's really one of the big stories right now. So, if you don't mind, can you provide a brief update on what's going on with her situation?
Well, it's been a whirlwind this last week, the last couple days. Everything that happened since the hearing has gained a lot of media attention. I think every other post on X and on my Facebook feed as well. Of course, algorithm specific, but it definitely is dominating the headlines. And it goes way back to the sentencing a couple years ago, and before that, I was working with her in the Colorado recounts, and so I've been working with her and following her work for a while. And the hearing on Wednesday was absolutely stunning. What happened there? The attorneys did a really great job of arguing in the pleadings and presenting all the facts of why this was unjust. Both the sentencing was unjust, the hearing was unjust, that they conflated elements of misdemeanor with felony charges. They misinstructed the jury during her trial. And overall, there was conduct on the prosecutor's side of things that was absolutely abhorrent in the trial period. And that came to light at the bench. And the judges, three panel judges of the appellate court here in Colorado, they grilled both sides, but it was not expected. Usually they'd grill the election integrity side, but instead they grilled both sides. And they stood up for Tina, and John Case stood up for Tina, and they did a really good job presenting the case. And ultimately, I don't expect a total win because I'm a skeptic at this point, a little bit of a pessimist when it comes to election integrity issues and the courts around those issues. But I am hopeful. I am very hopeful that at least we're gaining some ground and that the results of that hearing clearly have translated to a shift in the sentiment from Polis. And he is an opportunistic politician, and I think he might be shifting towards taking the opportunity to pardon her. Though I'm not going to let him use this to get away with the crimes that he's committed prior.
Yes, it was fascinating. I watched that hearing, and I'll put a link at freestatecolorado.com for people who haven't seen it. It's definitely worth your time, especially if you've been following the case, you probably watched it. But if you haven't, if you really want that kind of short synopsis of some of the problems with the initial case, it's definitely worth your time and really provides a good update to see where we're going. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, James. I know you're a big election integrity advocate. You've been a leader in that movement for a long time here in Colorado. It's really how I think we first met that, and of course with the Libertarian Party. And I'm really excited when I heard that you're running for Colorado Secretary of State, but you're running as a Republican. You switched over from being the Libertarian. If you don't mind, I'd love to get into your campaign. I do want to revisit some more details on the Tina Peters case later on in the interview because I know there's so much to talk about. I really want to see your take on maybe what some of the governor's candidates have said about Tina Peters and really see what you think, how accurate they are or not. I think that's very interesting for sure because we saw a lot of people in the Republican or conservative side of politics here in Colorado make some statements that aren't necessarily accurate, and I'd love to get your take. But for now, I really want to talk about your campaign and see kind of what your motivation is. Why did you decide to run for Secretary of State, and why did you change to be a Republican?
Free Tina Peters. That's the entire essence and mission behind my campaign. Both when I was running as a libertarian, I first announced in April of last year, and now as a Republican, same mission, Free Tina Peters. And actually, the reason for my switch is I believe that I can be more effective in accomplishing that mission, or at least advancing the messaging campaign behind the effort to free Tina Peters as a Republican than as a libertarian. As a libertarian, my goal was to attempt to hold the Republican Party accountable through the pledge strategy, which Hannah Goodman pioneered and which I was involved in as a congressional candidate back in 2024 when I went against Lauren Boebert for her lack of willingness to sign the pledge. And so I was going to use that same strategy in the Secretary of State race. And my goal was to help the Republican Party to select in their primary an election integrity advocate, somebody who would advocate for Tina Peters as opposed to a Pam Anderson. And so I entered that race threatening to spoil in the general election any Republican candidate who would not support Tina Peters. and would not support election integrity. And ultimately, it came down to a political environment within the Libertarian Party that became extremely toxic, as well as the opportunity within the Republican Party. I'm not saying the Republican Party isn't also toxic, it's just a different issue. And the path of least resistance demonstrated for the advancement of the message of Free Tina Peters and election integrity came down to being within the Republican Party that I could actually advance that message further as a candidate within the Republican Party. So I made that switch. Whether I'm going to end up forming a coalition with another Republican candidate who is equally supportive of Tina Peters, and one or the other of us backs out and endorses the other in order to win the primary against whatever Pam Anderson like candidate they decide to put in this time, or if the burden is on me to carry this all the way to the November election. I'm willing to do either one. So I'm here to play some politics. I've learned a lot in the last couple of years, more out of the election integrity space, or in the hybrid, both election integrity and the political environment, the Libertarian Party. And I think I'm well prepared to navigate this and to really build a constructive result and advance the purpose of the campaign. So there's a lot of pressure to free Tina Peters now on Jared Polis. There's a lot of pressure for him not to do it from his old allies and friends. But we'll see where he ends up in that. Ultimately, every day that he waits is another day she's rotting in jail, and he's responsible for that. Further, it's another day closer to her release based on this appeal and the results of the hearing. So that's the purpose of my campaign. That's the purpose of my transition from a libertarian to the Republican camp for this race. And I'm really excited for what we can achieve, what coalitions we can build, and what advocacy we can advance in the war man against machine. So that's the theme of my campaign: is man against machine. It's not just Republicans against Democrat Dominion voting systems or anything like that, because Dominion voting systems is now owned by Liberty Vote. They were Smartmatic, then they became Sequoia, then they became Dominion. Now they're Liberty Vote. So you can't just keep rebranding and expect us to not wise up to that. It's the machines themselves that is a threat to humanity, and AI algorithms interfering with the machines in order to steal our elections. That's the one thing that needs to be purely human. Elections. And so that's the goal of my campaign. Further beyond freeing Tina Peters is to decertify all the election machines across Colorado. I, as Secretary of State, will have the authority to do that and to put all of those machines out of commission, and direct people to use alternate methods of tabulation, including hand recounts. Humans do know how to count, believe it or not. And finally, some other elements in my career related to fraud and laundering, specifically within the notary system, came out of my work with Project Thaler. John Thaler in Arizona exposed the Sinaloa cartel laundering through fictitious deeds, which were falsely signed and notarized by essentially one person who was churning all of these out and laundering a bunch of money into different politicians' hands, including Adrian Fontes, the Secretary of State of Arizona, and Katie Hobbs, the governor of Arizona, former Secretary of State. So very much involved in the elections there as well. And so this fraud, this cartel influence is an election issue, and those go hand in hand. So I'd like to put all of our public records on the blockchain, make those immutable, make them forever. And if you're going to commit fraud in the public records and the county records, whether that be deeds or any other public record that could be generated for the purpose of laundering, that's going to be found, and that will be prosecuted, and I'll be able to secure that record in order to enable that prosecution by a just attorney general.
Wow, interesting stuff. And I'm really compelled by your kind of your theme of your campaign, this man versus machine. So if we had things, say we're able to go in that direction, right? We'd see an end to the use of basically the computers, voting machines to count votes, to basically decide, say who won, who didn't. Instead, would everything be hand counted entirely, where you'd go in, I guess, to the ballot box, you know, check the little box, or do what you do, circle it in, put it in the folder, and then put it in the box, and then somebody would just, they'd all hand count them and keep track of it that way. Is kind of that the vision of what you think might lead to better integrity in terms of our elections?
Ironically, Bill Clinton was the last legitimately elected president of the United States. Funny, huh? After that, we had Bush. And after that, we had Obama and McCain and their battle, and then Romney, and then Trump came. And there's been a very interesting layout of how these elections have taken place over the last 20, 30 years. And the transition from when Clinton was elected, everybody knew that night. We're waiting on Hawaii. They're several hours out, except everybody, all the other electors were determined at that point, and so the race could be called the same night. And all of a sudden, we're waiting weeks now to determine the results of elections. So elections have not improved as a result of the technology. They've gotten much, much, much worse. And maybe you'll recall your grandmother and grandfather going down to the polling station and volunteering. Even my grandfather, he could barely walk, barely see, but he was there with his walker, standing or sitting near the door, greeting voters as they came in, because that was something he was a part of. So the little old ladies counting ballots, that's really the most effective method to achieve trustworthy, secure elections. So we need to go back to that. We need to go back to that system. In every school, in every community center, in every precinct, the ballots need to be tabulated in that space, reported to the county clerks, reported to the Secretary of States, and then reported on national news as the electors are determined. So that's the direction we need to go, backwards, essentially, because all progress is not necessarily good, and the inclusion of machines here is not good. We had the hanging chads in Florida in 2000 with George Bush. Now, I'm not saying Al Gore didn't cheat. I'm just saying George Bush managed to cheat more in the right place. And of course, that election was a machine election. And from then on, we've had problems. We had machine voting come to Colorado early in the 2000s, and Smartmatic was able to infiltrate uh, in Colorado, and Dominion came from Canada and bought Smartmatic, and the two companies essentially merged at that point, employee owned, and that was a way to circumvent the Venezuelan ownership of those machines. And that started in the 90s in Canada with my friend Brent Bolesky. And I talk about all this on my website. I encourage you to read some of this story. But Brent Bolesky was a city council candidate and was cheated by the machines. He's like, could you audit this? And they just reprinted the receipt, and it's like, here's the audit. And he had no confidence in that. There was no way to check the security. So he was one of the original people to fight against election machines. And he's a good friend of mine. We've worked together hundreds of hours in the last several years in the election integrity project. And that came to Colorado. The headquarters is in Denver. And Dominion spread all across the country, taking over more than half of the elections across the country and running them. So in Colorado, Scott Gessler was the one to introduce Dominion to Colorado and really secure their operations here. And then, of course, we've had several Republican Secretary of State since then, including Wade Williams, which further developed and introduced mail-in voting and these other things, eliminated the caucus process, made the primary process machine controlled, and moved on from there with Jenna Griswold to eliminate our opportunity for recounts, which were statutorily required, and to have a partial hand recount alongside the voting machines if a candidate requested that. They eliminated that. So there's been an evolution over time, the machines slowly taking over more and more and more to appease their masters. And so at this point, the machines and the people using the machines are integrated into a single beast. And that beast is attacking our elections and taking over that process. And so we're kind of exiting the twilight zone now as people are waking up to this reality and taking the red pill and having our entire reality dissolve around us. The matrix is falling apart as we're realizing that Skynet is not a nuclear launch. Skynet is a machine takeover. And so we have these machine of our elections. We have these machines, we have these algorithms, these AIs, these hackers, these remotely accessible devices, and all of that's coming together. I just got a book here. My friend ordered it for me. I'm really enjoying it so far. Stolen Elections: The Takedown of Democracies Worldwide, and it talks about how Hugo Chavez came into power in Venezuela, and now Maduro after him, and how through the coordination of the oil companies and the Institute of Technology there in Venezuela, they put together a team that developed election machines to take over that country, and then they exported that around the world and took over dozens of democracies around the world, former democracy, excuse me. And fortunately, due to serious efforts by the Trump administration and Elon Musk in the 2024 election, they were able to attack the Serbian servers, which were hosting the takeover there, and stop that process. And so all the machines worked the way the public expects them to in 2024 because they weren't able to operate their algorithms and remote send instructions to the machines to modify those databases and the vote counts. So we got lucky that time, but as long as the machines are still in use, there's still that vulnerability. And I'm not saying there's some all-powerful AI out there somewhere that's taking over these machines. It's a combination again, humans and the machines. The AI answers to its creator, to its master. And so you get this hybrid, this cyborg style relationship between humans, in this case, evil humans, and machines, which the machines could be used for good, but their power is too great and it's inevitable that they're used for evil.
Well, I'm really glad you kind of explored those ideas because I think, I see it all the time, right? I see comments all over social media. We're saying, well, until you get rid of the machines, until you get rid of mail-in voting, until you really clean up our elections is the ultimate kind of phrase, right? We're not going to see a win for liberty or a win for freedom here in Colorado or really anywhere else. So I'm glad you kind of dove into that. So I guess just to be clear for people out there, maybe who are not so familiar with the subject, the idea is that these election machines, these voting computers that are used to basically count the votes, are hooked up to the internet or have the capability to be hooked up to the internet. Somebody can access them remotely, and because of that, they can actually program the machines or alter the results of the count. Is that an accurate concern? Is that the kind of the big concern behind the machines, generally speaking?
Correct. And we've seen the serious vulnerabilities there. And Tina Peters, as the hero she is, did so much to expose that. Oh, I have a video. I posted this on Twitter a little while ago, and it's Eric Coomer, who we all know from his DUI incident in Salida. And actually, if you want to follow Eric Coomer, it's at Jim W223. I don't know why that's his tag, but he's the senior economic advisor for Antifa, and he's on X. He doesn't post anymore. Him and I used to go back and forth a long time ago. But Eric Coomer, excuse me, tangent there. He is recorded in a video I recently posted saying that they have access to all major carriers, cell phone carriers, on their machines. That they have modems that can connect, like your cell phone, to Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, all these. So yeah, they're connected to the internet. They have that capability. Further, the BIOS password lawsuit was all about that ability, that you could go, somebody with the BIOS passwords could go into the machine and connect it to the internet and allow that machine to be remotely operated, even turned on remotely from some other place in the world and told to do things, run different operating systems, tabulate votes differently. Free for all at that point. Once you have the BIOS passwords, you have full control over the machine. And so Jenna Griswold got away with abhorrent crime so far with the negligent leaking of those BIOS passwords. And what's much worse is the cover up. Absolutely, much worse is the cover up of that BIOS password leak. So the ability to connect to the internet, the ability to be remotely accessed, that's been well established and is a violation of the CISA guidelines, the federal guidelines for elections, that none of your election equipment can be connected to the internet. But why would any election vendor offer a machine that couldn't be connected to the internet for easy manipulation by a third party? Because that's the service that they're selling. They're peddling around the world of hey, would you like to buy this election or that election? And so maybe the ground level employees of the Secretary of State's office or the county clerk's office or even in Dominion voting systems and now Liberty Vote, the ground level employees don't know what's going on. But higher up, and they're innocent, and they have good intentions, and they believe what they're doing is right. But higher up in the ladder, there is a salesperson who's peddling the results of our elections around the world. Like you said, there can be no victory for liberty while this continues.
Interesting, and I definitely encourage people, if you haven't watched our previous interview with James here on the lawsuit against Jenna Griswold, where James kind of lays it all out there with the BIOS password leak and this and that. It's really worth your time, folks. If you want the background on this, if you want a deep dive, James, you've been an incredible resource for the election integrity movement here in Colorado, really at the forefront of this, trying to get this exposed and now trying to change it with your campaign for Secretary of State. So I think it's extremely fascinating, very interesting, and I would say, there is a lot of controversy, right, on the right side of the political scene here in Colorado, because we had just to briefly get into it. I was at a governor's debate here in Greeley, and we had candidates up there saying, that they wouldn't pardon Tina Peters. That was that we're the party that the Republicans are the party of rule and law. And that they shouldn't pardon or commute Tina Peters' sentence. We've seen this in some local kind of Republican media reports, Republican journalists saying we should let the rule of law stand, and Governor Polis should not commute her sentence. And it was pretty wild for me to see Republicans saying these things, and then you had somebody like Representative Scott Bottoms, who's been a leader on this movement as well, who's been really one of the most outspoken,
Hello, Scott.
unapologetic. Yeah, he's been great advocates for freeing Tina Peters. And at the debate, it was so clear between him and the other candidates saying, listen, Tina Peters didn't do anything wrong. Once you understand the details of this case, you understand she should not have been tried. She shouldn't be in jail. She should. This whole thing was kind of a setup, or he didn't say that, but it shouldn't have gone to where it did. And so it was really interesting to see where do you see this split on the Republican Party here in Colorado? Now that you're part of the Republican Party, where do you kind of see the split where you have kind of the more mainstream and I don't know if you want to say corporate Republicans or however you want to describe it, who are really like saying, no, Tina Peters should be locked up. She should stay in jail. This is what the jury decided. It was all legitimate. This is what we should do. And then you have more of the grassroots, kind of more of the liberty Republicans, is what I would call them, who are saying, no, that's not accurate. How do you kind of see that split here in Colorado with the Republican Party?
Yeah, so the Republican Party is 100% guilty of election fraud. And I'm not here to join that. I'm here to infiltrate the Republican Party and purge it of that element that's within it. So going back to George Bush, obviously guilty of election fraud, but also Wayne Williams standing side by side with Jenna Griswold during the Colorado recounts with Tina Peters and the El Paso candidates, saying our elections are good to go. And the state of Colorado, through the Secretary of State's office, spending almost $1 million on that ad to promote it all around the state on TV to assure people that our elections are good. Because look, a Republican is next to a Democrat, and they're both saying they're good. Well, look at Kill Chain. Kill Chain was an HBO documentary released in early 2020, excuse me. Yeah, before the 2020 election, where Democrats, particularly Amy Klobuchar, a senator out of Michigan, Minnesota, I think, she was leading this conversation and helping to develop this documentary, talking about how the machines aren't safe, how we can't trust the machines, how the Republicans are going to steal the election and whatnot. So she was kind of violating the secret pact that Republicans and Democrats had, that both sides are going to cheat, but they're going to cheat back and forth. And what they're going to guarantee is that nobody with genuine liberty intent can get into office, whether that's a Democrat or a Republican. There are liberty Democrats, there are liberty Republicans. Let's just eliminate those and let's get our corporate shills, our warmongers. Let's get those people in office. That's the intent of the establishment. The intent of the voting machine apparatus is to prevent any interruption to the bloodbath of the recent years, ever since the Iraq War. I believe that was a voting machine war that was enabled by voting machines and may not have taken place otherwise. And so, in every war sense, clearly, clearly. So we've got this bipartisan election fraud. I need to emphasize that element there. And so there are Republicans still who built their careers on that. Scott Gessler, Wayne Williams, and probably others who are still more involved in politics today, who benefit from that and who want to keep that deal alive, that as long as they turn a blind eye to the Democrats doing it today, it'll be their turn tomorrow. And so they're kind of a part of that apparatus. I want to call one person out in particular, and maybe this is political suicide, but honestly, I'm going to do it because I was at the Denver Press Club Governors Forum for the Republican candidates. There's like 20 of them all the way down, and each one got like 30 seconds total. But Barb Kirkmeyer made it a point to say that she was not going to pardon Tina unless she got more information. Two responses to that. How ignorant can you be? And how heartless can you be? It's one of the two or both. So if you really don't have enough information to understand that Tina Peters is innocent, then you haven't been paying any attention. And if you're so heartless to let a 72-year-old woman rot in jail surrounded by murderers, rapists, drug addicts, and the rest, then you're what the hell? What the hell? So I'm sorry. Maybe this isn't great for my campaign, but I just got to speak the truth at this point. Every single Republican candidate for governor needs to be lining up and bending the knee and saying, Tina, what can I do to help you? How can I get you out of jail? How can I make my campaign a messaging campaign to promote your freedom? And so that's my expectation for my colleagues in the Republican Party who are running for different races, is that they step up for Tina. And uh, Barb, by all means, if you're hearing this, please fix it. It's not too late. You still have the opportunity to correct your mistake.
And I'd say let's give somebody the benefit of the doubt, right? Maybe there's somebody who's newer who hasn't paid attention to politics. I'm not talking about any of the candidates. I'm just talking about, average person who, maybe has a
Sure,
very
absolutely.
surface level understanding of what's been going on with the Tina Peters. Maybe it's only what they've read in the mainstream media or seen on the news, right? What would you say is the biggest, kind of that elevator pitch that 30 seconds doesn't have to be 30 seconds, but, kind of the condensed version of here's the evidence to show that what happened with Tina Peters. What would you say to somebody out there who's maybe just unsure and just because they haven't been exposed to it, maybe they're watching this and they're hearing all this information for the first time. What's kind of the best explanation for Tina Peters' innocence, the guilty verdict she did receive, and kind of how would you explain that to people maybe?
Most people are under the impression that Tina is guilty of tampering with election machines, that she committed election crimes, that all these other things are a component of her guilty plea, and the reason why she's served in jail. They're like, the law is just. We need to support the law. That Tina is guilty of all these election crimes. She wasn't charged with any election crimes. She wasn't found guilty of any election crimes. She was charged with influencing a public official and identity theft of some sort, involving her operation to do a backup before the trusted build, observe the trusted build, and do a backup after the trusted build. So the panel of judges actually commended her for doing the backup of the trusted build beforehand. They had questions about after the fact if that was necessary or in the fulfillment of her duty, but it's important to recognize that this was an entire publicity campaign. They similar to what they did to Ross Ulbricht when they charged him. They made a media campaign about kill for hire assassinations on the Silk Road, but they didn't charge him with that. Similarly with Tina, they made a media campaign about all these election crimes, but never charged her with that. So I think that is the most obvious, the most clear, the most succinct thing I could say is look into the actual charges, look into what she did, look into the Mesa reports 1, 2, and 3, and look at the databases. Because in addition to the questions about the conduct of the prosecutors, we need to look at the actual election fraud that took place. There were 3 databases found on that machine, and one was the actual vote count. One was a third, like a separate database with a highly Biden biased mix in it, and the third was a combination of the two. So they needed to add enough Biden votes into the final tabulation there in Mesa County, not to get Biden to win Mesa. Biden would never win Mesa, but to get Trump to win Mesa by less. And so they don't need to steal the election in one county. They do it a little bit all across the state, and then it culminates in a stolen election. When you shift it a little bit everywhere, then the result changes. 1 or 2% here or there, and in a 50-50 election, that's the difference.
Yeah, fascinating stuff, James. You know, it's so telling, I think, that the media campaign and everything that's been said is not exactly what she was charged with. As you said, it's not exactly the it backs up all the details from the case don't necessarily back up what you hear on the news or on social media in particular. But you know, I gotta say, James, I mean, if the elections were rigged, wouldn't the media tell us? You know what I mean? Wouldn't that be the front page story on the? No, I'm just joking. Everybody watching this, I'm sure, is savvy enough to know that, of course, you know, the media is going to present things in a very specific way. And but you know, I guess so that just to be clear, that's kind of the evidence of the election fraud, or the fact of what Tina Peters found. Three different databases on the machine itself that showed the actual total. I just want to reiterate so I'm clear on my understanding, and maybe people out there, the actual total, kind of a skewed result, and then kind of the amalgamation of the two of them to kind of say we're going to peel votes off here and there, and then this is going to be the final result sent to the Secretary of State's office. Is that kind of how it would work?
Yeah,
Okay.
just a little bit in every county, and you could do more in the red counties actually because they're looking at it less. They're like, oh, Trump won our county, we're good to go. But when Denver comes up with a plus 20 for Biden or plus 30 for Biden, and Mesa County is only a plus 3 for Trump, well, Biden's gonna win. So that's what happened. And I do want to mention the federal element of the prosecution or lack thereof. So FBI raided her house, and Belinda and Sharona and a bunch of other houses got raided by the FBI. Not the CBI and Colorado Bureau of Investigation, not the local SWAT. The FBI sent its agents to Colorado. That's expensive to conduct those raids. But there was never a charge from the district attorney for the District of Colorado on the federal level. They never charged Tina Peters with any federal crimes. I was waiting for it all through 2022. I'm like, the hammer's going to drop any minute. Hammer's going to drop any minute, but they want to do it. And this is my belief. Sources and methods. They were protecting sources and methods because if they brought this to federal court, they would have to include a disclosure about the methods in which they executed their operation. And I believe there were infiltrators within Tina Peters' team who were assisting her in the commission of crimes. And encouraging her to do things which were not necessary. Like I said, those judges commended her for doing the backup, for backing up that hard drive. They said, you did your duty by backing up that hard drive. But influencing the public official by having somebody with a fake name come and watch the trusted build, that was unnecessary. You didn't need to watch the trusted build. What are they going to do? Click install and then sit there for half an hour? Like that wasn't necessary that they actually conduct that element of it. So I believe there were people influencing what Tina Peters did to cause her to violate Colorado state law. And all these charges came from the Colorado state law, Colorado level, the state level, and came against her on that, but nothing from the federal government. So I think it's very suspect, the coordination between the federal government and the state officials, and the attorney general, the secretary of state, and the district attorney, in order to create the perfect prosecution, which they could take through and try to stick her with, and did stick her with, and stuck her in jail now for over a year.
Wow, yeah, interesting stuff for sure. I mean, there's so many little red flags, right? So many little things that should raise a suspicion of people out there, whether it's the FBI raids and no federal charges, whether it's, for me at least, it's this idea of, you know, if our democracy, quote unquote, our entire system of government is reliant upon these voting machines, why aren't they open source? Why is it so proprietary, I guess? And I get it from a technological or corporate standpoint, right? But if this is supposed to be for the public good, like this is supposed to be something that's so big, shouldn't these machines be open to all types of scrutiny? Shouldn't people be able to just tear them apart, dig into them, expose and even look for vulnerabilities, right? I mean, that's the idea of like hackers that work for companies, right? They kind of get in there and see, okay, where are their exploits? Where are there things we can kind of change things with, right? Where are the vulnerabilities? So I think that's something that I'm like, well, if these machines are we're using them for all of our elections and the basis of a legitimate government, then they should be open to public scrutiny, and we should be able to really have detailed understanding of how they operate and be able to get in there, right? I mean, and understand the software. It should all be open source. It should totally be open to the public. And sure, you could have a private company provide it, but they can't keep secrets about how the machines operate, how they're working, and not be able to provide access to them. That for me is the biggest red flag out there. It's like, well, hold on a second. If this is supposed to be a transparent process, if the public's supposed to trust it, then we should have access to tear these things apart, understand the software, and have cyber security experts be able to go through them. But that doesn't seem to be the case. I mean, or am I off base there, James?
That's exactly the point. I'm going to say something clearly. I'm going to say something loudly. State action. There is one function of the government that is exclusively to the government. Like you could have private prisons, you could have private roads, you could have all these other things, but you can't have private elections. The elections for government office are exclusively a government function, and so anybody who engages in that is engaged in state action. Dominion is a state actor. CTCL is a state actor. And Mark Zuckerberg is a state actor because he gave $400 million to CTCL to give to municipal governments in order for them to control the elections and bring in more voting machines and do the mail-in ballot and all the COVID stuff back in 2020. So all those are state actors. And I encourage you to look up Dominion class action. It was O'Rourke v. Dominion Voting Systems et al. And all these other people were defendants on that also. But a class of registered voters filed suit against these people who interfered with the 2020 election. And Gary Fielder and Ernest Walker, who I worked with in 2020 and 2021, all the way through all the lawfare that took place afterwards, were discussing that same issue. And one of the key cases we cited in that case, the Dominion class action, was Terry v. Adams, which is a case that took place in Texas after back in the 30s or 40s, I want to say. So post Civil War, post freedom of slaves, but pre civil rights, where there was a Democratic club in Texas called the Jaybirds, and they would get together and have a straw poll, and they would. And again, the South was heavily Democratic during this period of time, totally dominated by Democrats. And so the primary in the Democratic Party was essentially the general election in the South at this time. So they would have a straw poll in this club called the Jaybirds, filled with Democrats, and they would determine who they would put up for the primary. And all of them would then vote for that person instead of splitting the vote or dividing the vote. And guess what the racial makeup of the Jaybirds was? Is all white. So you can't be a state actor and discriminate based on race in that environment and control the elections. Exclusively government function of the elections was taken over by the Jaybirds at this point, and excluding all black voters in the community from participating in the straw poll, which ultimately would determine the results of the primary, would ultimately determine the results of the general election. So the Supreme Court heard this case and sided with Terry, a black farmer who sued over this, and said, hey, if you're engaging in exclusive government function, such as the elections, you're a state actor, and all state actors have to defend and protect the rights of the people, including Terry. And so that's a landmark case, and we cited that case in ours. Of course, in the environment of the post 2020 election, we absolutely got screwed over by the courts and by the media, and everybody was against us. So that wasn't a great time to be fighting for election integrity. But there's never a good time to fight for election integrity. You just fight. And so that's why I'm still here. And that case needs to be brought back up. The Dominion class action needs to be educated on for people around the country to understand that elections are a state function, and if any private company engages in that, they're a state actor, and they need to protect your rights at that point. They're liable for suit for failure to protect those rights in their personal capacity. So, like we sued Jocelyn Benson, we sued Gretchen Whitmire, we sued Brian Kemp, we sued Brad Raffensperger, the secretaries of states and governors, Tom Wolf, and all these others in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Georgia in their personal capacities. Now, of course, they sent their attorney generals in to defend them, but we sued them in their personal capacities because when you violate somebody's rights such as conducting a fraudulent election, which has obviously been proven in those states. When you violate somebody's rights, we had vans coming in from New York to drop off ballots in Pennsylvania. You had water lines breaking and suitcases coming out of underneath the table in Ruby, shoving the ballots through the machine 10 times after everybody else left that night in Georgia. And of course, Michigan, you have the voting machines doing what they're doing, and Matt Perno did a great investigation on that post-election. So you have these people violating people's rights, and when you violate somebody's rights, you're no longer acting in your official capacity because government officials don't act unconstitutionally. So you're acting in your personal capacity. You're outside of the protection of the immunity of government action. You're now acting personally. So we sued them personally, and Dominion Voting Systems is no longer protected as a government entity when it violates people's rights. It's a private entity and is liable for damages in that capacity. So that's the essence of that lawsuit. I could talk about that for hours, but I just wanted to communicate that important point that you said, that elections are a public issue and, in my mind, an exclusively state function.
No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the background there, James, as well. And I'm real excited, and I really hope people are getting excited about your Secretary of State campaign. To have somebody out there on the campaign trail who's bringing up these issues, who's not afraid to talk the about these things, right? Because we do see that, as we mentioned on the Republican side, that some of the people maybe aren't so willing to engage in these types of discussions. So I think people should be excited about your campaign. Figure out, I mean, how can people support you in your campaign? Please let us know.
Well, we've had a quick launch since I switched to the Republican Party on December 9th. I launched a new website, redflameofliberty.com, and you can go on there and read this whole story, this background. I've got all my lawsuits uploaded on there, and you can look into some of the shenanigans I've been involved in over the last several years trying to confront Dominion. Anything from watching them dump voting boxes into dump trucks on January 4th. 2021, 2 days before January 6th. Remember, 2 days before January 6th, they were dumping ballot boxes into dump trucks. So that's an interesting story you might want to look at on my website, or the Colorado recount lawsuits, the BIOS password lawsuit, the Dominion class action lawsuit, and the work that we've been doing is all there on the website for you to read about. You can donate through the website. I launched 2 days ago my donation portal, so we're off to a very fast start. And I ask everybody to please support, donate 50, 100, 725 is the max. I'd love some max donations in there if you don't mind putting some in. Plus, I got merch coming. So the merch store is about to launch. Probably by the time this airs, you'll be able to access the merch store, and that's a guy with a baseball bat beating up a voting machine. I got some T-shirts with that printed on it, and you'll see the image on my website if you check it out, and that'll be on T-shirts probably by the time you see this video.
Well, and I hope you do get the contributions because I'd love to see you travel the state, get this message out there, speak at events, and of course, push all of this out there and just get it in
Thanks.
front of people's faces because I think one of the biggest issues is people are just uninformed. Ultimately, there's some people sure maybe who are willfully ignorant or don't want to talk about these things, but I think for the general voter, the general person, they just haven't heard this before. They haven't been exposed to it because they're relying on the mainstream media to tell them what's actually happening in our society, which we know is not not accurate. But I would really be excited to see you out on the campaign trail, traveling across Colorado, getting this message out there, and really let's shift the narrative about our elections here in Colorado and demand that they are public, that they are transparent, that they are open to the people, and that we can be assured that our votes are counting properly. I think that's fundamental to this idea of a representative government, obviously, and I hope we can get there. So, as we wrap it up here, James, any final thoughts for people?
Yeah, there's a maximum that you can donate to my campaign, but there is no limit to how much you can give to Tina Peters. Go to tinapeters.us and support her legal defense. Support those attorneys, the paralegals, my good friends who are fighting for her and trying to get her out of jail. And so please donate as much as you can to them. They're working their asses off, and they're really suffering a lot of scrutiny right now and a really hard time, but they're absolutely doing their best, and they are changing the conversation. Everything we heard from those judges on Wednesday was an element of their pleadings that they put in, and they were so convincing in those pleadings, in the appeal pleadings, that the judges took Tina Peters' side and advocated her case for her, and absolutely tore apart the the prosecution at that point, even telling the prosecution, "You don't have to take that absurd position." And when they were trying to defend the element of the conflation between the misdemeanor and the felony charge, where specifically she was charged with the felony, the language of a misdemeanor, and the jury was instructed on the language from the misdemeanor, which is a lower standard of proof than for a felony, and then convicted of the felony. So the jury was misinstructed. It's a mistrial, needs to all be thrown out. Yes, please donate to Tina Peters, and thanks so much for the interview, Brandon.
Wonderful, James. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time. Good luck on the campaign trail and keep us updated if there's any news we should know about. Thank you so much.
Peace. Thanks.
Take care.